What is the worst mistake you've seen someone make at work? PT. With late-stage Alzheimer's had been progressively getting sicker. Used to be a walker/wanderer, eventually just got a bit sicker each day and bedbound. Everyone kept giving his meds like normal. Ate less, tummy became distended. He was found unresponsive in his bed, apparently vomited, and died. The nurse's aides were in charge of cleaning him up. One went to clean the strange vomit that came out of his nose. She wiped it with her gloved hands. It was shit. He had shit coming out of his nose. He apparently had a bowel obstruction and it got so bad to the point that everything backed up and he was vomiting up his own undigested food and fecal matter. A simple monitoring of his distended stomach would have revealed that. A simple charting of his last bowel movement would have revealed that. Nobody could find when his last bowel movement was, and the charting that should have been done apparently hadn't been done in months. It could have been caught. He didn't have to die that way. All those little negligent mistakes eventually lead up to one gigantic mistake. My family started a recycling business. It was a somewhat large business. My grandparents, aunts and uncles, parents, and cousins were all involved. About a week after it had opened, my aunt bought around 50 tons of newspaper. She hadn't checked the prices, they changed quite often, and bought it about 50% higher price than what it was selling. It almost caused the business to fail. My grandfather was angrier than I had ever seen him. When I was a teen I worked at a full-service gas station. One day a guy came in towing a boat to get gas. A guy a couple years younger was working and thought the owner had taken the gas cap off of the boat. He placed the gas nozzle in a fishing rod holder. It is basically a hole in the top of the side of the boat. He proceeded to pump about $40 worth of gas onto the floor of the boat. The owner was understandably upset. An old friend of mine was filling up his 36er with gas at the floating dock, except that he fed about $400 of gas into his freshwater tank/system. A well-liked director of our art department was leaving for another company. He crafted a beautiful and inspiring message which announced his departure, how much he'd enjoyed working with us and how he was now on to a new adventure. He sent the message to the entire company. One of his junior employees accidentally replied all how her life was devastated, she was heartbroken and she was going to be despondent over losing the best lover she'd ever had. He was married, not to her, and had 3 children. The bon voyage celebration was quietly cancelled. He left, silently, 10 minutes after the reply had been sent. Without understanding the mail system she tried to do a recall all and sent a please don't read the message this is attached to. It was a private message between colleagues. Hoo boy, that was an interesting day. In the Army, I was assigned to a field artillery unit. During a training exercise, a gunner in our unit didn't align his tick marks up with the collimator correctly and his tank ended up shooting a dummy round into a formation of soldiers killing 4 or 5. If it were a live round, the whole unit would have been decimated. Dude got 15 years, or more, in Leavenworth. Sincere question, do you think 15 years in prison was what he deserved? I actually just barely prevented this from happening. An undergrad was working in the genetic research lab I am doing my PhD in. Keeping things clean and eliminating contamination are pretty high priority in our lab. Different people will use different chemicals, ethanol, hydrochloric acid, or bleach are the most common. The undergrad decided he was going to rinse some bottles in bleach before placing them in the hydrochloric acid bath to make them extra clean, creating chlorine gas in the process. I stopped him right before he turned our lab into a scene from World War I. This is exactly why you have supervisors for undergrads though. Heck, even for graduates. Dumbass didn't clear his weapon, 9mm, before cleaning it, shot himself in the hand. Just second lieutenant things. How do you miss this? Pushed a corrupt Windows image to every PC on the domain using System Center. Erased the whole university, including the System Center server itself. Recovery was a labor-intensive process. I didn't see the guy doing it, but I saw all the PCs suddenly start formatting themselves. My Bill owned a bar and live music place once upon a time. I worked there off and on. There was a guy who would bring his girlfriend in on Friday nights and his wife on Saturday nights. His daughter turned 21 and showed up one Friday night with her friends. That was a mess. I practice as an architect in the UK. I was working on a job which was a refurbish of a listed hotel. The problem was that this hotel had had a fire, and then sat open to the elements for 5 years before the refurbishment work began. Obviously the entire interior basically had to be stripped. My firm was hired to do design and specification work, but no on-site inspection or design for the demolition and slapping works. If we had been hired, we most certainly would have been able to stop the accident. The workmen on site decided to speed up the demolition work. They would bring a small digger up the old hotel lift to the 4th floor and begin the demolition work there. The entire interior of the building collapsed, 3 people were crushed to death, and several others were seriously maimed and injured. I take health and safety way more seriously than most of my colleagues, but it's because I know how stupid mistakes and oversight can lead to people's deaths. Watched my coworker cover himself in shit. He improperly operated the waste pump out equipment at a marina I worked at. The nozzle came off the boat and forcefully sprayed him in the face with several gallons of weeks-old human feces. This is also midsummer in Florida. And he had his mouth open. Did he die? Pretty sure he did. He damn sure wished he did, I bet. I work in the television broadcasting industry, and I work with people who have ejected/rewound a tape that was live on air. This was many years ago. Aired the wrong show, not the wrong episode, but the wrong show. Aired a different channel's content. It's all satellites and we get them all on the router. Shit happens. No one died or was fired. A mold setter forgot to demagnetize the injection molding press clamp and tried to pull the 30,000 pounds mold from the press. The crane basically tried to lift a machine the size of my house off the ground. When the D-ring broke, the crane bounced off its tracks. I was able to feel the ground shake from 1,000 feet away. A brand new hospital was built and they brought all the really expensive hospital beds by to start filling the rooms. You know, the kind that can roll in and out of all the rooms when the patient has to go to X-ray or whatever. Well, they didn't build the doors of the rooms wide enough to accommodate the beds, resulting in a long delay on opening the hospital while the doors were torn out and fixed. Wow, that's pretty stupid. My father's best friend and a coworker were cleaning a big oven. Apparently there was argon gas in the oven. One of them fell down because he couldn't breathe and my father's best friend just jumped in to try to help him. They both died. This is the reason we have monthly safety meetings about confined spaces and why you should never ever try to rescue an unconscious person yourself, but fight your first reflex and call help. I work in library cataloging services and our lead deleted all of the customers' information from our database. She's still the lead, believe or not. Well, she's still lead. The MLS degrees that know what they're doing get stuck working with the public because an angry patron knows what's wrong and then complains to the board. A computer duck-up gets passed off as technological difficulties and the patrons are none the wiser. A kid who was working as summer help in our public works was driving back a pallet of asphalt seal coating on a 1-ton dump truck to their garage. He didn't secure the load, so when he went around a corner half the pallet dumped over and onto a concrete street. I can still see the seal coat on that spot 10 years later. A coworker friendly asked my salary. I told him I was making about 3-4x more than him, and he was in a higher hierarchy. Hell was set loose. We were both fired by the end of the week. Mine is. A friend of mine is an intern medical resident. There was a patient in her hospital that a whole team of doctors had just convinced the family to remove from life support after weeks. My friend went into the room after reading the wrong patient's chart and told the family she expected the patient to make a full recovery. It was everything that the family had been praying to hear for months only to find out it wasn't true. That is terrible. How long did it take her and the family to find out that it wasn't the case? I worked at a dental manufacturer. While in training, a fellow trainee decided the hot wax boiler was too hot and took the high-pressure air hose and blew it directly into the boiling wax. Wax sprayed her face, her arms and her legs. She was severely burned and had to be rushed to the hospital. After that, every workspace had a warning telling us not to try to cool the boiling wax and trainees were not allowed to cool their molds with the high-pressure air hoses. Editor: not sir. At office job, boss walked over to show me pictures of the deadlift platform he built at his house over the weekend. Opened up his gallery on his phone and the first couple of pictures were of a chick spread wide open. At restaurant job, we keep metal plates in an open flame for the sizzling fajitas. I was grabbing a fresh one, with a pair of tongs, for an order but accidentally dropped it. A dishwasher walked up and picked it off the ground. He got huge blisters all over his thumb and fingers. That is why I always have the picture I want to show someone open before I get to them. I watched a guy put his fingers into what was essentially motorcycle chain being driven by a 60 horsepower servo motor. He didn't do that twice. I'm betting he couldn't do that twice. A guy sent in documents to prove his dad had died and get his driving license cancelled because of it, and B, have his own license changed to include the title he inherited on his dad's death. Unfortunately, he and his dad had the same name, and then obviously the same title. Cue him calling a month later to see if there was something wrong with his license, only for me to access his record and find out he was dead. Whatever dumbass processed the application didn't bother looking at any of the dates on this guy's paperwork and just cancelled his license. That and the person who put a pot noodle, with the foil lid still attached, in a microwave and evacuated the building. Working in an online gambling chat room. Dude comes to take me off my break and comes in the room. At that point a player had told us his brother had died, so I said oh no. Dude taking my place sees this and gives a big oh yeah. Kool-Aid guy style. I don't understand working in an online gambling chat room. When I was young I worked in a cafeteria. One night the head cook shit her pants and claimed she just sat on macaroni. That's either really weird shit, or she has never had proper macaroni in her life. While in the Navy I worked on the electronic systems on P-3 aircraft. We needed to replace a Winchester plug on an aircraft. It's a plug-in with over 200 wires that plug into it. The guy I was with walked over to the plug-in and cut off all 200 wires in fell swoop. Normally you would take one wire out at a time and transfer it into the new plug. We now had over 200 wires with no idea where any of them went. The plane ended up being grounded for over a month while we had to manually determine where every single wire went to on the plane, and then compare it to the plane schematics. He was permanently transferred out of the shop after that incident into a desk job. Not wearing his seatbelt while driving down a loading dock on a forked truck. I held his hand after he was penned down under it until the paramedics arrived. He didn't make it. I still feel like I should have been able to help. It's all I can do not to cry when I see his kids around mine. Throwaway for obvious reasons. I was a trainee dental nurse for a year and about 4 months and we had one patient come in for a pretty standard procedure. Looking at her chart she had a history of heart problems and the anesthetic the dentist gave her contained adrenaline. This stuck out to me as weird, but I was 4 months in and she was 10 years into being a dentist, so I kept my mouth shut. Patient went into cardiac arrest on the table after being given the anesthetic, got wheeled out by paramedics after I called an ambulance. Turns out she shouldn't have been given adrenaline and the dentist just didn't check her medical history properly for whatever reason. That practice got shut down a couple of years later and I still feel guilty every time I think about it for not saying something. She was okay afterwards, but it was very scary. I worked in a biochemistry lab that extracted a protein from animal tissue for study. We stored samples in a fridge in the lab, and one night the fridge failed. My boss was cleaning it out while I worked at a nearby bench. He opened a jar of rat spleens, said "Phew. That's stinky," and threw it in the trash. A second later the smell hit me. My knees buckled and I nearly vomited on the spot. I ran from the lab, and within half an hour the entire third floor of the C wing of the medical school emptied out. A lot of researchers were pissed off at us that day. I learned about two powerful biochemicals, putrescine and cadaverine. My brother, who works at JP Morgan & Chase as an investment banker, told me once that his work colleague who was assisting a powerful person in a lucrative deal accidentally caused them to lose 14 meters. Soon as he realized the magnitude of his mess, he started to break everything in his office and started shouting that he was going to commit suicide. How did he cause them to do that? Then did they get it back? I worked at a Costco for a year and a half and they like to move certain items from one side of the store to another or just offset any item. Well, someone had the bright idea to move glass jars of garlic from the floor to the first level platform, basically a higher shelf. Now Costco sells things in bulk and their motto is bigger is better. So these are large jars. Naturally someone dropped one and the smell. Dear God, the overwhelming smell. Probably kept you safe from vampires. Had a co-worker in the late 90s get her glove caught in the chuck of a pipe machine. Wrapped her hand and lower arm around it like a fruit roll-up. Gloves and power tools don't mix, kids. It's such a weird concept too for many. We wear gloves for safety doing a lot of things, but the instant we add motorized power to the equation, clothing becomes an incredibly dangerous thing. Even things like necklaces, rings, ties, etc. are all extremely dangerous around moving equipment. I worked in a busy pizzeria when I was young. The pizza maker was talking to his girlfriend who was standing in front of him on the other side of the counter. He throws up the pizza dough in the air to spin it, and it comes down and lands on top of his girlfriend's head and continues to spin. The packed dining room erupted in laughter and she ran out crying with flour all over her face and jet black hair. People have to remember that they're not laughing at you or even with you. They're laughing at the situation. Shot himself reholstering a pistol. 40 calories slug entered just above his kneecap, drilled clean through his femur and tibia, exited his leg just below the kneecap. He walks with a heavy limp now, but he came within a cm or two of blowing his kneecap off. The bullet was sitting in the knee pad when we took it off during medical. Don't use baggy gloves when you're carrying, kids. I had another guy do a no-look clearing of his pistol, actually, another. 40 calories, didn't observe a clear chamber, pulled trigger, and shot through his pistol case, through the edge of a counter, skimmed past his knee, and land about a foot to the right of my right foot. I wasn't happy. I saw a girl who had just been hired drop the water bottle when trying to put it on the cooler, and it rolled across the office glugging out water the whole way. By the time someone stopped it, 90% of the water was on the floor, evenly spread through everybody's work area. In her defense, those things are heavy. Thanks for listening to another episode of Reddit X. Subscribe and activate the notification bell so you won't miss any stories. Feel free to share your own stories below in the comments. Have a good day.